So, first, really nice to welcome you all to this session on empowering Southern practitioners through innovative grants. And I'd really like to welcome all the participants to the session on behalf of the, this group of organisations who put this together. So the Adaptation Research Alliance, the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, the Global Resilience Partnership, and of course the International Centre for Climate Change and Development. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be discussing this topic of Southern leadership and how the design of the grants that we're able to put out can be really instrumental in shaping how successful those grants are at enabling much more leadership and capacity at the local level. And of course, this topic of locally led adaptation has really been gaining momentum, which is brilliant. And programmes like those run by the 4 partners in today's event and others are really shifting that focus increasingly to make sure that adaptation projects are being driven from the local level and by those local level priorities. And so the speakers that we've got joining us today are going to share some really great examples from the Philippines, from Kenya and Uganda, and from Bangladesh. But before we get into the details of that grant, the grant mechanisms that we'll be looking into today, I wanted to take a moment just to zoom out to the bigger picture. So if we have a look on the next slide, I've got a really striking, do you mind if we just looked at the next one? I've got a really striking graph here on the right-hand side from the IPCC AR6, the Working Group 2 report, and this is from the Africa chapter. And I think that this graph is just a very, very stark reminder of and a motivation for what we're trying to do through some of these grants. And this, so if you look on the right-hand side, we've got 4 graphs here, and one that shows how climate-related research in Africa has really received an absolutely tiny percentage of the global climate research funding. So that's the yellow line at the bottom there, and you can see that it's that the amount of funding for Africa is around 4% of global climate research funding. And then if you look in panel B, you can see that as a percentage of all the research funding that's allocated to a region, climate research has, since 2010, made up 5% of Africa-related research funding, compared to a 3% share for climate research funding in the rest of the world. So, within Africa, it's a bigger fraction of the research funding, but still, it's an absolute tiny percentage overall. And then the most stark really is to look at these bar charts. So on the left-hand side, you can see the major funders of that research, the UK, the EU, the US, Germany, Sweden. Great to see some of that funding coming through. But most of that funding for climate-related research in Africa, historically, has really flown to institutions that are based in Europe and in the USA. And that's really shocking to see, and that's something that has to change. And I think that some of the grants that we're looking at today, some of those mechanisms that we're looking at today, are one way of doing that. If we go back to the slide before, I'm really sorry about getting these slides in the wrong order. I wanted to talk a bit about the CLARE programme. So this is an initiative by the UK and Canada for action-orientated research on adaptation and resilience. And it's really trying to address some of this problem that's highlighted in those graphs from the IPCC in terms of the approach that it's taking to its grant making. I'm really focusing on research for impact, on gender and inclusion, on strengthening capacity, and on developing and promoting diverse and equitable partnerships that really champion Southern leadership of those research projects. And it's critical, as I think we're going to see today, that funders are really seizing this problem and addressing it from the way that they are actually designing these grants. And I've got an example that I'm going to go into from the CLARE transition phase that's going to show how some of that had an impact. But just before we do, since we have this slide up, I'll just I'll let you know a bit about the CLARE programme itself. So it has 3 key themes, and one is on really understanding climate risks, the science, the underpinning science. The second on risk-informed early action, so looking at informing anticipatory action ahead of humanitarian crises, for instance. And then the third one is really on development in a changing climate. And these are looking at across the timescales from the near term right out to the longer term. And it's this program is really intended to be socially inclusive and building sustainable action that's building resilience and reducing vulnerability. But I think, you know, the key part of this is the way that these research grants under this program will be designed. And, you know, we've in the call for the first call for concept notes projects, we really have elected to champion this idea of Southern leadership and ask for teams that convene diverse coalitions of actors and organisations that really link research to action and building effective and equitable partnerships. And, you know, that we really recognise that Southern-led research and knowledge is much more likely to have an impact on adaptation policy and practice in Africa and in Asia Pacific, and of course in other regions of the world too. But those are the Clare focus regions. So we really encourage through this programme projects that demonstrate and enable Southern leadership. And one of the examples I wanted to go on to on the IPCC slides, Suzanne, was just an example from before we just opened this first research call of Clare, but before that we had a transition phase where we were building from some of the previous projects towards the new programme. And during that first phase, we provided a $250,000 grant to the African coordinating lead authors of the IPCC's sixth assessment report, particularly the Working Group 2 report, with the aim of strengthening African participation in that IPCC assessment process and strengthening, you know, the assessment of risks and adaptation options for Africa. And this project and the way that this was done has really achieved that objective far beyond our expectations. And this is really nicely reflected by Deborah Roberts, who was, as you know, the IPCC Working Group 2 co-chair. And she said that, you know, because of this support that was given to the authors, this chapter presents the clearest and most comprehensive review of the continent ever contained in an IPCC report. It's advanced the understanding of climate risk across the entire report, not just the Africa chapter. And the implications of that report, you know, it's had really massive influence well beyond the strengthening just of the chapter in the report. There's been strong influence on the African Union Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy. There's influence on the African Group of Negotiators expert support position on enhanced climate action on land. It's influenced the summary for urban policymakers, which will be launched at COP27. And then there's been some really groundbreaking work in that chapter that was enabled by this report and by the Southern leadership of this chapter that has extended influenced the entire IPCC report. And this is focusing on the complex climate change risks. And a project that was led by the lead authors, synthesizing concepts of climate change risks to update that risk framework to better understand how risks compound and how they cascade across multiple sectors. Now, this has been, you know, it's influenced the entire report, but it's also influenced policy, you know, far beyond African shores. So in Belgium, this new risk framework has been used by the Chief of Staff for the Federal Minister for Climate, Environment, Sustainable Development and Green Deal in the Belgian government, which is reporting up to the National Security Council in Belgium. And in the US Department of Energy has set their 2030 vision for risk assessment based on that updated complex climate change risk framework. So, you know, why does this matter? You know, African research and empowering Southern leadership of African research, you know, is a major benefit for adaptation in Africa. And it's also, you know, as this example demonstrates, you know, showing African thought leadership that's influencing international practice worldwide. So I think everybody wins by this type of investment. So now I'd like to turn to the grants that we're going to examine in more detail today. So there are a few common points across these three grant processes that are being highlighted today. So firstly, all of these grants were led by Southern-based organisations. They were all demand-driven project ideas that came from needs in the communities or from the national level. Co-production was really key for these grants. They were actively promoted or encouraged in the ARA and CDKN grants, and they really built on prior co-production in the case of the GRP and the International Centre grants. And these grants were, the scale of these was small to medium, so $5,000 up to $200,000, and timescales range from 3 months to 3 years. So, you know, and we think that collectively there's not been enough adaptation projects that have taken these approaches. And And, especially in the adaptation research space, which still tends to be dominated by Northern researchers, as we saw from those charts from the IPCC. Although, hopefully this is changing. And being really intentional about making that change happen, is really the responsibility of the funders, and, to set that expectation of the programme. So each of these 3 grant programmes was really intended to meet local needs and recognise that the best way to ensure that was to set up those calls for project ideas that ensure those needs were front and centre, and insisted on partnerships between researchers or producers of knowledge and practitioners or end users that be able to use this knowledge in their plans and actions. So how did they do that? Well, we're going to hear from each of those, some examples from each of these 3 grants. But firstly, if I can just give a quick overview. So the CDKN project held an action lab with the 3 selected projects to help them refine their impact pathways and bringing wide ranges of people together so that they were all clear on the intended impact and what actions need to be taken to achieve that. These projects were originally supposed to be 18 months, but they were actually extended to 24 months because of COVID. And then if we look at the ARA micro grants, so 25 of these. Now these are much smaller grants, but they were focused on identifying burning issues in communities that research could help to meet. The lead organisations had to be based in the Global South. I mean, that was part of the criteria for these grants. Preference was really given to grassroots and practitioner-led collaborations. So there's a real focus with these grants on action. And I guess that, these mobilising the communities to discuss the challenges they were facing is really important to make sure there's a deep understanding of the burning issues. And it's not that these projects were intended in the short time frame, which was, I think, about 3 months to solve these challenges, but really to enrich the conversations and be a catalyst for further action. And then finally, the Research Knowledge Coalition grants run by GRP and ICCCAD, they facilitated short communications-centric interventions that have been helping to bridge research into use. And these are the smallest grants, I think, a modest scale of $5,000. It might not seem like it can change the world, but these small projects really made sure that useful knowledge was given a chance to be packaged up and targeted for the right end users. So I just want to check. We're going to look at some of the results from the Mentimeter, Suzanne, or should I introduce another speaker before the other 3? What's next?
I think we'll go next to the next presentation, please.
Yep. Of course. Okay, so great. So the first speaker that we have today is going to be Renzo Guento, and he is joining us from the Philippines. So it's really amazing to have you on the line, Renzo. Thank you so much. So Renzo is the Associate Professor of the Practice of Global Public Health, and he's also the inaugural Director of the Planetary and Global Health Programme of the St. Luke's Medical Center College of Medicine in the Philippines. He's also the founder of the newly established Sunway Centre for Planetary Health in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and a member of the National Panel of Technical Experts of the Climate Change Commission of the Philippines, convener of the Planetary Health Philippines. And so, a real expert here on planetary and global health. And we're really looking forward to hearing from you, Renzo. Thank you.
Thank you very much again for this wonderful opportunity. Good evening from Manila. And I can now safely say that it's good evening. But just a few days ago, you might have seen in the news that the Philippines was actually hit by one of the strongest typhoons that we've ever seen in recent history. And many communities have been devastated. And that just speaks to the importance of tackling climate change and why it is a public health issue that physicians like me need to be addressing. And that is why this project was created, entitled Putting Health at the Heart of Local Climate Adaptation Planning to Maximize Human Well-Being. I'm sure every time we discuss about climate change, we think of many different images, coal plants, polar bears, how climate change is going to affect economies. But not very often we talk about the enormous impacts of climate change on human health. But of course, now that we are still living in the middle of a pandemic, COVID-19, it provided us with an opportunity to really highlight the inextricable linkage between climate change and human health, and why health should be incorporated into climate action, but also how and why climate change and climate action should also be integrated into the work of the health profession or the health sector. And so this is really the aim of this project, as you can see there, to spark and strengthen collaboration between health and climate leaders at the local and national level to build capacity for climate health action and adaptation. And apart from St. Luke's, we work closely with the University of California Center for Climate, Equity, and Health. In fact, we also have other collaborations with them. So this opportunity that was given to us really helped boost our existing relationship with UCSF, and also Healthcare Without Harm Southeast Asia, which is an international NGO that has a regional presence also here in Manila. So we can move now to the next slide. And this project was conducted, as I've said, in the middle of the pandemic, when the lockdowns were still being imposed, especially in the Philippines. You might have heard that the Philippines has the longest lockdown in the world. And that really, impeded many of our activities, especially in the realm of advocacy, education, awareness raising, and implementation. However, I think the lockdowns also serve as a blessing in disguise, because due to the lockdowns, due to the immobility, we had no choice but to conduct the majority of our activities online through Zoom, through virtual platforms. And that really enhanced the participation of health professionals from different parts of the country, especially in an archipelagic country like the Philippines with 7,000 islands. Now you have many participants, joining through the virtual platform. But apart from that, as an enabling factor, let me just enumerate some of, I guess, the critical ingredients for the success of this project. Thankfully, we have a dedicated and competent core team, not only in St. Luke's, but also among our collaborators. And the grant that we receive really helped us in ensuring our operations. I'm already alluded to the salience of health that was affected by the pandemic. I'm sure you've seen also, or you've noticed that in COP26 in Glasgow, health became front and center because of the pandemic, and we have to make sure that health doesn't disappear in the climate conversations from local to global levels in the upcoming COP27 and even beyond. I already mentioned the gift of the digital technology, which allowed greater participation. But also the exciting part of this project is, for the first time, we have seen health professionals working with other quote-unquote non-health sectors. And I wrote quotation marks there because I think that every sector is a health sector. The agricultural sector is a health sector. The housing sector is a health sector. The energy sector is an energy sector. And I think that the climate challenge should be a strong enough an imperative for the health sector to be working closely with these other sectors so that we can mount the much needed climate health action in order to adapt to the health impacts of climate change. This project also allowed us to have a much more contextualized approach, focusing on the local challenges. There have been several conversations already on climate and health, especially at global and regional levels. But it's very important to bring these conversations down to the level of communities, of hospitals, of the local health professional societies. Because again, climate change may be a global issue, but it's very local in its manifestations, especially in the realm of health. And so, these opportunities for funding local activities is certainly very critical. And again, I guess in relation to the digital technology that we took advantage of, it allowed us to also utilize creative methods during our innovation workshops. We use Jamboards and, Mentees, such as the one that we used a while ago, and many other tools in order to make sure that, there's participation and meaningful participation among the different stakeholders represented in these, rooms, Zoom rooms. Next slide, please. So I forgot to mention that that's just one, what they call this, screenshot of one of our previous, Zoom calls, Zoom workshops. And you've also seen the word cloud that was developed by the different participants when we asked them, what do you think are the major health challenges that we will be confronting in the Philippines in an era of a warming planet? So now, what are the rooms for improvement? First, we are grateful for the funding that we received because it allowed us to spark these conversations that would have never happened if we did not receive any, initial support. And of course, we want to translate the conversations into real action. And so hopefully, moving forward, the next stream of funding and resources will be channeled to local organizations in order to create demonstration projects, again, to turn these aspirations into action. And so, for example, in those Zoom workshops, there was plenty of ideas for potential collaboration and synergies, but we need to make sure that there are resources in order to support organizations to actualize those aspirations. And remember, well, I'll move to the next point. Research is also another arena where support for local organizations will be very useful. We already heard a while ago about CLARE, and especially in the health sector, we still need to continuously generate knowledge, new evidence, in order to document the climate health impacts and even to project what will happen to the health of Filipinos in the next 10 to 20 years if climate scenarios of IPCC will turn into reality. Because evidence is our most important tool in order to inform action, policies. How do we redesign healthcare? How do we, manage and treat these diseases that are sensitive to the changing climate? And finally, more resources will be made available so that we can build the capacity of the health professions, of health professionals to be able to address the impacts of climate change, to build climate resilient health systems which are on the front lines of the climate crisis. We want to make sure that hospitals and local health systems and clinics are the last building standing when climate-related disasters strike. And so our vision is to train a new cadre of climate-oriented health professionals, and that we can only do if more resources are made available. It is important to remember that during this pandemic, health professionals, not only in the Philippines, but around the world, have been so much overwhelmed by the additional excess burden inflicted upon by the still ongoing pandemic. Many health workers have been burned out, both physically and mentally. And now the climate challenge is going to bring not just future waves, but future tsunamis of climate-related health consequences. We need to support them. We need to invest in them. And so hopefully, moving forward, we can mobilize resources so we can build a climate-resilient health sector that will protect and save lives in an era of a warming planet. I'll stop there. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to our conversation.
No, thank you so much. It's so great for us to hear from you and, really hear about, the value of this type of grant for helping you and your colleagues to really build the evidence base and build capacity to deliver at the local level. So thank you. We're not going to take questions now, but we will, because we're going to move into breakout discussions after the speakers. Then we can really get into some more detail about each of these topics. So thank you so much for now, and I really hope you can stay to join us for the breakout group. And so I'd like to now introduce our next speaker. So it's a real honour for us to invite the next speaker, which is Janet Ingombalu. So she's a food systems specialist and socioeconomic economist with over 15 years of experience in transformative and innovative change in the food sector. So really looking forward to hearing about especially the transformative and innovative element of that. She's been really instrumental in developing some of the revolutionary innovations that foster food systems change in the development sector. And that includes the regional market information system and the climate change for grains, that CI4G system. She's currently working as the regional programme coordinator at the Eastern Africa Grain Council and focusing on leading sustainable impact on livelihoods, on food security and on support to economic growth, driving change in 10 countries in the wider East Africa region, so including Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Malawi, Zambia, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and in Burundi. So a very wide range of expertise. And we're really looking forward to hearing from you, Janet, about how you've done some of that work through this grant and the value of Southern leadership in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind, for that introduction. And thank you, everyone in the meeting. Thank you all for coming. And also for the team at CDKN for the continued support. So for EAGC, we are grateful. We had as a project running through for 24 months, like it was said earlier, on mitigating the effects of climate change on grain quality and losses, both in Kenya and in Uganda. Our aim basically was to increase the use of climate information to increase production, reduce post-harvest losses, and increase market access. Most of you know who the situation in both Kenya and Uganda, especially on grains. Grains are the staple food for most of the two countries, where Kenya is a net buyer of grains, and sometimes Uganda is a producer. But when you look at the food losses, one of the biggest challenges has been the infestation of aflatoxin, moving from one country to another. And this has led to a lot of post-harvest losses over time. So the project was very instrumental to get us to rethink on what we can do best around this. And we had a partnership with several partners. We had ICCCAD. ICCCAD is part of the ICCCAD intergovernmental organizations partners, ICCCAD. And we also had the National Drought Management Authority, who are also our partners. But we also had private sector partners, and because EAGC is a membership organization of the private sector partners, so it was good to bring the private sector on board to start thinking on the impacts of climate change and what we can do around it. We had budget funding of around US dollars, around 197. This was over time. When we started at a small amount of money, but as we went on from engaging with the stakeholders, we saw that we had additional areas to add on to the projects, and the team at CDKN was very supportive in supporting that as well. And we were able to start off, first of all, with stakeholder engagement. We did a study and a survey to see the understanding and the level of participation of various actors in the grain sector. And from our findings, it was very little because the information was not trickling down to the farm level, to the traders or to the millers themselves who were doing the business. Next slide. Yeah, so from the project, what you see was what we set out to do, knowing that we normally lose around 30 to 40% of our production through post-harvest management. And this is most of the time due to sometimes when it rains before harvest, and by the time you're harvesting, the grain commodity is already wet. So by the time you take it to storage, when it's already wet, and it gets several post-harvest various post-harvest losses in that, as you store or as you harvest. And this was intervention that we were trying to see if we can reduce that. And our main area of focus was climate information. We have as EAGC the grain hubs, what you see on the right hand side. And the grain hub is the central intervention where we reach our farmers and the core starting point of our interventions, and to see how the farmers at that level can be supported to understand the information. They're already formed in cluster groups of maybe around 30 to 40 people per group. And in each group, we support farmers with various services where we've already profiled the farmers, and we support them to get inputs, equipment, storage facilities, advisory, financial services, and market linkages. So we saw that was a great point of entry to bring in climate information, because as they do the input supplies, we are able then to link them with the information. Our key users of the information were the farmers themselves, the traders, and the millers. And also we had a lot of engagement with the policymakers because we needed some policy interventions both in Kenya and Uganda. How we did it, it was repackaging of research. We had one of our partner, ICCCAD, who produces information on a daily basis. We also had the Kenya Meteorological Services, who also have information. We also have the National Drought Management information, but this information wasn't trickling down or is not packaged in a way that can be used at the farm level. So our process and our intervention was to see how we can repackage research into usable information that can be used at farm level. We also did the interactive digital system. We developed the CI4G, which is able to then translate this information to village level, to where the farmer is, and we're able to provide information at that level. We had several forums that we engaged with CDKN and partners to bring again the information on climate change, and then we had various publications from this intervention. Next slide. So from all this, which was quite interactive, quite engaging, there were various key achievements. One of the things that was an add-on as we were developing the program was to develop the database of climate smart technologies and service providers, because as we were giving information on what was going to happen, whether it's on the rains, on the and that, one of the questions was, what then do we do, knowing that now there's all these implications, what can we do on the ground? And that was one question the farmers kept asking us as we engaged. So we developed this climate smart appropriate technologies database and service providers where you can find them, so that when we do the CI4G advisory on the climate change, you can therefore link the farmer to a technology or a service provider where then they can get help and help mitigate. We also did what we call the 10 best practices for climate mitigation and adaptation. This was a publication that was translated both in Kiswahili, especially for the Kenya users. For the Uganda users, we were also going to translate, and I think some of our partners have taken that on board and are translating it again into local languages. So this is going to go, forward even beyond the project period. We supported over 400 farmers through directly, but through the G-Hubs. But indirectly, there are other members, again, because we were focusing on the leadership of those farmer groups. Then the information keeps going, translating as we go on. And I think this is a live project that we was working with, because even currently we still have the materials and the trainings are still going on even as we speak. And next week we also have another engagement where we continue to train beyond the project, which is very good. We also had various engagement meetings, both with ourselves and CDKN on a continuous basis, again, which was very good for the life of the project. And I think it's one of the innovative ways to manage the grants. And from that, we were able to, make some changes in the project, but at the same time, make sure that the grants are well managed. We had various learning portals that we engaged together, both as partners and also as an implementing partner. We also got recommendations for the farmer languages and the climate information communicated in various media houses, which was a good engagement. Then we developed training guides for online news, which is still ongoing, translation into local languages, like I said, and then the C4IG tool. So going forward, the next slide, some of the enabling factors was a joint project co-design, which we did at before the commencement of the project. So we all had clear deliverables and clear insights on what is expected for the project, but also at the end of the day, bringing ideas from the co-design team. We had the monthly engagement, which was also a very good thing and an innovative process, so that as a partner, and it was good that CDKN was a very integrated partner in the project, co-designing with other the other enablers, the CDKN, the government. We brought in the farmers themselves, so we did the co-designing and co-publishing of documents. We also did the events, webinars, and learning workshops, which was very engaging and insightful because they were learning events for ourselves, but also opportunity to share experiences. Introduction of new partners and agencies as we went along. We got more people on board, and also the private sector, especially who had not, been engaged much on the climate information. Then we also had a joint end of project learning event, both with ourselves and CDKN, and brought in our members, our partners, the private sector, the policy makers as well. And also we had various YouTube live media interviews, and also we've continued to do post-project engagements like this one. We've done several various engagements, and I think that is the way projects in future should be implemented. So I think there's one more slide on the scope for improvement. In terms of leverage, we said that we could use events to demonstrate the technologies as we go on. Even from our engagement in such a forum, we can now go deeper into demonstrating what technologies we have seen that are appropriate going forward. In terms of opportunities, new research on climate adaptation practices and long-term projects. Like you see, for the grain sector, for you to get an impact or intervention, you have to look at the crop season, the crop calendar. And most of the activities, when you start to see impact, is post a whole planting season or a whole harvesting season. So you look at the entire crop season to be able to, get to understand the impacts at that level. So that is a proposed area for long-term projects. For partnerships, we continue to strengthen and broaden the conversation going forward, getting on board a lot of private sector engagement because we saw it was quite low, and there's still an opportunity that is still pending there, and also how we can mainstream climate change frameworks in the works that we are doing. And then we also try to see how we can continue ongoing future partnerships. So I think that's all for now to share. I thank you all for listening to me. Thank you very much.
Oh no, thanks very much to you from all of us, because I mean that was such a rich talk, and it really shows us how what you've been able to do with that funding, and such a wide range of engagement, but also such a wide range of of impacts and that major uptake of the information, but also those cutting edge technologies on the ground, and then how you're able to publicize that. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And we're going to hand over now to our next and final speaker. We can hear from the example from the Resilience Knowledge Coalition and the ICCCAD grants. So I'm going to hand over to introduce you all to Zakia Sultana, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Environmental Science and Disaster Management of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman Science and Technology University from Gopalganj in Bangladesh. So thanks so much for joining us today. I hope it's not too late for you now. Your research really encompasses a very wide range of topics, covering climate change adaptation, environmental non-migration, flood risk and water resource management. And you've been using mixed method approaches and geographic information systems in your research, and we're really looking forward to hearing about that now. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon, and thanks, Rosalind, for the introduction, and thanks a lot to the organizer for giving me the opportunity to talk about our project. And this title, you can see here, the locally led adaptation strategies for resilience building in informal urban settlements in the face of climate change. And I'm starting with a brief background of this project. And the rapid urban expansion is widely visible in Asia and Africa, and this is associated with the emergence of urban informal settlements, for instance, slums. And in addition, the triple effects, for example, COVID-19, climate change, and conflicts have been influencing to increase the number of slum dwellers. And these informal settlements accommodate about 1 billion people in the world. And these urban poor communities in the slum have limited access to essential utilities and services, and moreover, slums are polluted and unhygienic, and a great concern of the high incidence of crime due to the unemployment problem. But the people have been surviving there for the longer time. And the communities under the Slum Dwellers International have innovative locally led adaptation strategies. And they focus on their economic strength, environmental and social sustainability. And their adaptation strategies would be beneficial to the slums in other countries having similar issues. Therefore, co-learning and replication of the strategies are essential to build a resilient community. So our aim is the knowledge management, and that means what we learn from the communities of one country, we are trying to disseminate this knowledge to the other countries. And this is important for the policy formulation. And I'm an academic and working at a public university in the southern Bangladesh. And his name is Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman Science and Technology University. And I have another two partners in the project. And first one is the Slum Dwellers International that is based in Uganda, and they're working for the urban poor communities. And another partner is also another public university in Bangladesh that is called Jahangirnagar University. And it's a small grant initiative. So the total amount of the funding was $5,000. And the funding organizations are International Center for Climate Change and Development, Global Resilience Partnership, and Climate Justice Resilience Fund. And in the right side picture, here you can see that the slum dwellers in Uganda, they are collecting waste, and at the same time they are cleaning the environment, and they are using this waste for productive activities for earning monies. So we have collected this type of adaptation strategies from the slums in Uganda. Then we have disseminated these adaptation strategies through webinars, also the online article, and one of our research article is in the processing. Next slide, please. Sorry. So the enabling factors. So this small grant initiative is very different from the other funding. This is like a startup grant that helps to initiate the idea and which lead to get the bigger project in the future. That's why this is called catalytic grant. And the project helps in networking that also influence the collaborative work. And the southern organizations have less facilities compared to the northern organization. And this small grant can initiate empowering these organizations to contribute to the development activities. And thus, the funding organizations can achieve their aim to work for the disadvantaged countries. The project is focused on the grassroots communities, how they are coping with the adverse situation, and this thus it contributes to the proper policy formulation based on the actual problem and solving strategies of the root level people. And the action research can bring out the actual problem solving strategies which can contribute greatly to the local needs. And as we know that the wise saying, think globally and act locally, and this project contributes to the development of the local community, and does it contribute to the development of the global community. Here in the picture, you can see that the slum community in Uganda, they are producing charcoal from the biodegradable waste that they collected from the households, and thus they are doing these income generating activities. So these waste that block the drainage channel and also causes the flood, but they collect this waste, and not only the biodegradable waste, they produce this charcoal from biodegradable waste, and also they collect plastic from the non-biodegradable waste, and they sell this to the market and earn money. So next slide, please. So the scope for improvement of the project. So for the better outcome of the project, a few things can be considered. And the first one is the designing of the project, like the team formation with the partner organization. That the team members should have the common interest, otherwise they cannot work properly. And in this case, the partner organization should have the freedom to form their own team. And for the better contribution, the funding organization can organize more follow-up events like the knowledge sharing webinar or workshops. And if there is more dissemination of the project output, there is the high possibility to motivate people. And second scope of improvement is the disbursement. As I mentioned earlier, that the southern organizations are from the disadvantaged background, and if the disbursement is at the end of the project, that can demotivate the team members, since that might they might need money to continue their work, but cannot manage by their own, and therefore the disbursement should be through at least 2 installments, and the disbursement should be according to the work type. See, if there is field work required in the project, then the team members should record the advance payment to their field work. And third scope of improvement is the implementation. So monthly meeting that helps to progress the project work, and the team members can share their challenges, and the funder can help them how they can solve their issues. And the funding organizations can organize troubleshooting sessions. The team member may need to develop certain skills, therefore their training session can motivate the team members to perform better. And our project was totally during the pandemic period, so we have designed is differently, but due to the pandemic we could not implement it according to our design. But this is not the ending, this is the starting. So now I'm seeking other fundings to address the research gap that I found from the previous research activities, and for moving forward. So thanks a lot. Thanks for listening, and looking forward to discuss.
Thanks so much, Zaki. It's great to hear how much you're able to do, even with such a relatively small grant. And also really to hear that type of grant has been catalytic, and that you're now looking for further funding to take this forward. So Thank you, and thanks also, to you and to all the speakers, to Renzo, to Janet, Zakia. Thanks so much for reminding us of the importance of thinking globally but acting locally. And I think that was such an important reminder for us. So thank you. So I'm now going to hand over to Giulio Ruggio from the Adaptation Research Alliance Secretariat and from South North to take us into some breakout discussions.
Thanks, Rosalind. I think given the size of this group, I think it's fine for us to stay in plenary. So really during this session, the part of the session, we'd like to hear from you about your experience, essentially on what currently works and what needs to change. I think it's important that we're always ensuring that we're constantly learning from these other projects, programs, and other people's experience to ensure that we continue to have great impact and build capacity going forward. So before we enter into this discussion with you, we would like to share a Menti poll to get a better understanding of your engagement with Southern-led programs and some of your takeaways from the presentations. So the Menti has just been posted in the chat. And really the questions here are, have you had experience with a Southern-led project? And then secondly, what was the most important takeaway point from the presentations that we've had today? So while this Menti is live, I think we can start to unpack some of the questions that we have for this group and would like your input on. So I think ideally we'd like to just have a broad discussion on the following. So we want to get a better understanding of what we should continue to do within these projects to enable Southern leadership and better capacity building. So we'd like to enter into discussion on the various criteria that the grant makers can use to achieve Southern leadership and capacity development. And then second, we'd like to enter into a discussion on what we should change. So the system's not perfect. What else can we do? What are the pitfalls that we can avoid? What new approaches should we take in the future design of these types of grants? So I'm quite happy for us to kind of just open the floor on this. If anyone has any particular desire to jump into either one of the what we should keep doing or what we should change, please feel free to unmute and we can go into that. While people are thinking about what they want to just bring into this discussion, if we just look at the Menti poll that we provided in the beginning on what does Southern leadership mean to you? It seems like there's, from that poll, it seems like there's, Southern leadership is really understood by this focus of the work, so ensuring that it's the work is on local issues. It's on who is involved, ensuring that those leadership positions are in the Global South. But from my perspective, I feel like there's still a limited understanding on how this translates in practice. So, for instance, what exactly does leadership mean? And from my perspective, leadership is more about how the things are done, and then if this happens correctly, the outcomes of this essentially are appropriately Southern. So, in my context, Southern leadership is essentially a person or organization's ability to gain kind of a greater sight of this wider system within a project. So this is like the financial systems and the decision-making structures. That person or organization's ability to assert convening power within a project, and that person or organization's ability to be in a position to initiate changes in priority settings. So making sure that these mechanisms are actually being taken on by Southern partners, for me, is what Southern leadership is. So with that, I will see if there's anyone who would like to jump in on either what we should continue to do or what we should change going forward. And perhaps, if I'm correct, that I don't see any hands. I'll give you an example from the ARA. So in the ARA, we wanted to use these micro grants as a way to test essentially what happens when you bring together, local relevant actors to co-explore and co-create. So what does this type of co-creation and collaboration actually achieve with in short periods of time and with limited resources? So the idea was to allow the grantees to explore these burning adaptation issues that they're facing that requires both knowledge and research to solve. And through these grants, we wanted to get a better understanding of the knowledge needs for action, particularly the role of collaboration between knowledge and action and how this can lead to kind of co-created solutions. So with that as what we were trying to achieve through the grants, one mechanism that we implemented to kind of allow greater Southern leadership to occur was during as a element of the selection criteria within our call was, for instance, to ensure that the proposal lead had to be based in a country region facing the burning issues. So that lead had to be from the South. Now, my question would then be, is this actually enough? So, for instance, does being the lead enable sufficient Southern leadership to happen, or do we actually need to go further than that? So perhaps I'll just pose this question back to the group and see if there are any takers.
Julia, I'm wondering if any of our speakers might like to comment on any of these questions.
Yes, by all means, speakers as well. So I guess I'll just more direct it to the speakers then. And when we have calls that require leadership to happen as the primary function, so that the lead organization, but anyone else can be from either North or other areas, is that sufficient, or was that in your case, if you encountered that? Is that sufficient in your particular context? Or does this need to go further, talking about Southern leadership being throughout all elements of the particular project that you're working in?
I can jump. Hello, this is Renzo. Yes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I can jump in, and of course, it's not an easy question. Talking about leadership, local leadership, Southern leadership. Well, based on our experience, I think it's important that there is already some, at least baseline level of leadership for example, inside the country, and I think we're just blessed to have. For example, my team in St. Luke's, but also other organizations that are already starting to think about these issues, but perhaps, again, requiring some injection of both financial, but also technical expertise. So there's already desire to do something, and there are, teams that can actually, galvanize some initial movement. But then perhaps a bit stuck, and now I'm telling you some of our initial experiences. Oh, we want to do something, but we needed also perhaps a key that will unlock it. And that's why we're very grateful for the grant. It allowed us to do something, at least initially. And then now we're thinking, okay, we can do that. We can do something bigger, right? And then let's try to start surveying opportunities. But also, for example, how can we take advantage of the connections that came up because of this initial investment in order to think big and do something at scale, right? So that's one well, I already gave several reflections, but also I think, I think there's definitely we need to strengthen Southern leadership. But at least in our experience, I mentioned a while ago, we have a partner also, which is the University of California, and I happen to have a very strong relationship with individuals in their Center for Climate Health and Equity. So that was also quite useful and helpful for us to actually move forward, because they're also bringing some additional technical expertise in order for us to really successfully implement projects. The other interesting thing about that relationship is that center in UCSF is quite young. And so they're also learning themselves, and they would say, you know what, Renzo, we're learning a lot from our experience, from with you, and from you. And so it's bi-directional learning that happens. Southern leadership, of course, gets strengthened and enhanced, but our Northern partners also learn in the process. So those are just some of my reflections. I hope I was able to touch the question that Julio asked. Thank you.
Thanks, Renzo. Yes, I completely agree on the importance of that bidirectional learning. I think often we have a focus on either north or south, but often when you're engaging in those processes appropriately, it really should be both. And that learning, we also need to accept that sometimes there's a strong learning element that needs to be focused on the north in order to enable certain things happening in the south. I will just go to Rabina first, who had her hand up. So please come in.
Yeah. Hi, Julio, and hi, Rosalinda, and the rest of the team. Thank you so much. I'm Robina, Program Manager for Climate and Early Action for East and Southern Africa, working at the British Red Cross based in Kenya. Now, well, very nice presentations and a very good introduction from Rosalind on how the global map looks. One question that will maybe help us answer this kind of thoughts is when we looked at the funding that is going, I remember very well, it's the funding that is going on climate activities in the African region, more so the southern region. We saw countries like US and others having a lot of that funding. One thing then we should first ask ourselves, related to now the bilateral learning that the colleague who has just left talked about between North and South, is what is this they are doing? What exactly are they doing? Is it things that we can also replicate in the South? If not, maybe contextualize them to fit within the South, because that will be one of the things that we can use to learn, because it looks like there are certain attractive projects that are being developed there, and the same is not maybe being received from the southern part. The second aspect that I put across is, and something that I've had coming up and maybe from experience, is most of these leadership institutions, they have certain levels of leadership, and if you see the way most of the projects are structured, or the call for projects are structured in the South, is going, most of the activities go direct into implementing. Maybe it's a research, it's an implementation activity, it's direct into the project itself. But have we stopped to look at how is the governance structure of the institution? Yes, we look at it, that they have maybe a CEO, a lead, a researcher, but have we thought extra into, can some of the funding go into making the governance structures strong, beyond just the capacity building that we put in the projects, that we help build capacity of the stakeholders, etc. But what about the governance structures? Because it's from the governance structures that we'll be able to get the strong leadership that we are looking for the southern organizations. Then the other one, which is related to what my colleague has said, is most of the projects that come out or that respond to these calls are somehow tend to stand alone. What do I mean by this? It acts like these projects are in competition. So one organization applied, the other one applied. So that cross-learning or co-sharing of information is still limited. There is a level that is still there, but it's still limited to the extent that you can be from the same funding institution, funding different streams, but you meet at the same time presenting and you're like, we are almost doing similar things. So that cross-learning is very limited. So maybe from the inception, from the design of the calls, it should be put into in a way that it's very closely related, that there'll be a lot of interaction, and maybe it could be even cross-reporting against milestones of different other partners. That way, it helps to learn and not replicate and not do almost similar things. Also helps build the capacity through the learning process itself. So those are the 3 things that directly came into my mind. I'm happy to give it back to you, Julio.
Thank you, Robina. Some very provocative points there. I mean, I definitely agree with a lot of that, particularly your point on where the resources, when we talk about leadership, actually goes. So, and when you're talking about capacity and resources going straight to the implementation side, so building the capacity of those users, for instance. And I guess this perhaps is a little bit trickier in kind of smaller scale, these types of micro grants. But perhaps it's, and I know this is a little bit more possible in large programs, but looking at where some of those funds also need to travel to. So what other types of capacity needs to be built, be this something around financial capacity and reporting structures, allowing that to happen to enable the kind of research leadership and that side to kind of happen smoothly. So I'm going to hand over to Zakia, who is had a hand up next.
Okay, thank you very much. So to my perspective, this southern and northern leadership, I think it's better to do it together. Then the project will be faster and do the mass progress. And for instance, in nowadays, if you think about this, the problems of this, for instance, global warming and climate change. So the northern people, they can learn from the southern people, because they are facing the same problems nowadays due to the current situations. For instance, if you I talk about the disaster management practices in Bangladesh, and can give an example of flooding. So in Bangladesh, normally the people we are facing flood almost every year. But if you see the last flooding in Germany, and in that flood, many people they died. But we are facing this flooding every year, but we don't have much these dead people in our country. So the northern people, they can learn from this the southern, from the people like from the global south. Thank you.
Thanks, Zakia. Yes, I think it's important that learning goes both ways. Completely agree. And 2 other points that have been brought up on this as well. I believe next is Shuchi.
Thanks, Julio. So I lead the Resilience Knowledge Coalition, and I basically want to talk about a little bit about the catalytic grants and how we sort of perceived measuring and reporting for change. So essentially, and draw light on that. Essentially, small grants, if reported for and measured for too closely, cannot yield the kind of results that we'd like, and therefore we're managing them for change. We're not managing them for indicators or tracking progress in ways that would hinder the effectiveness of individuals who are executing those grants. So that's a big shift in the way we have perceived and thought of these grants. So these are not performance-based disbursements. These are not disbursements based on indicators, but really like ensuring that that change happens and the deliverables get delivered, and recognizing that there's that element of trust and recognizing that leadership that exists already rather than thinking about fostering it. So we're working towards shedding light on that expertise of experts like Zakia who and experts like the slum dwellers in Uganda that she was mentioning, and the service that they do around resilience, and not just disaster resilience, but also conservation of resources through recycling of waste and management of waste. That's just a silent service that we don't recognize, and those are the kind of stories that we want to surface, and that's the kind of management we want to do. And we feel like shifting that management is possible in these smaller grants, and we're excited by the possibilities of what this could offer in terms of the kind of expertise that's surfaced. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that we kind of acknowledge in a lot of these cases that these are, small grants, and there's, needs to be a little bit of a limitation in terms of kind of what can be achieved, what is expected, but allowing that flexibility to allow things to naturally just kind of occur, and capacity to build in a certain avenue if that's where the approach goes. For instance, with the ARA and the co-creation approach that we had, you need to allow these certain emergent things to happen and not be too strict from within the call, and from the donor's perspective to kind of constrain some of these things. Amanda, please do come in as well.
Thank you, Julio, and thanks again for facilitating such a great and rich discussion. And a huge thank you to the speakers as well, because the insights that we received from all three were quite invaluable. I think my points were touched on by some of the speakers which have just gone before me. But one thing that keeps, because I lowered my hand and then raised it again, because one thing that keeps coming up to me is the point around partnerships and the importance of partnerships. Because as you keep reiterating, Julia, these are small grants, right? So we need to realize that, organizations that need to realize that, firstly, these are small grants. And because of that, in most cases, you won't have the capacity to do everything in-house. And there isn't enough time. These projects are not long-term projects. So not only are there usually capacity issues, but there are also time constraints. So how do you leverage, partnerships, preferably existing partnerships, to ensure the longevity of your projects and, to increase the probability of success? And one example, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Amanda April, and manager under the CDKN program. One example that I'd like to talk about, which is another small grant-based project that CDKN recently wrapped up, was in Namibia. And there, one of the key successes of that project around partnerships. But one thing I'd like to highlight was that, it's very important. What we learned from that project in Namibia was that it's very important, firstly, when we think about, how we evaluate projects and who we want to distribute grants to, we need to think about funding initiatives or projects which build on its existing momentum, which build on existing programs, rather than to start from scratch. I think it's something that has come up, maybe indirectly in these conversations, because in Namibia, we build, I think, throughout CDK, some of the grant-based projects, we didn't start from scratch, right? We funded grants, we funded projects which were going to build on, existing momentum because that is one way of ensuring longevity and success. And again, because when you do something like that, in Namibia, for example, there was already existing, appetite for the project. It was demand-led. And because of those things, it ensured the success of the project. And one major thing that came out from the Namibia project was that now, as a result of how well that grant was managed and how well the project was implemented, the project has now received funding for even longer period because of the partnerships that the project had with government departments, with local-based organizations, with the University of Namibia and things like that. Those partnerships were a sure guarantee of the project's success because they were not starting from scratch. The project made sure to embed itself in existing government program to ensure greater support from government, to ensure greater support from other local and private sector organizations. So yeah, might be rambling a bit, but I think just to reiterate the importance of not starting from scratch when we evaluate proposals, making sure that we are funding projects that are building on existing momentum to ensure sustainability and to ensure increased uptake, especially at a local level. Yeah, and I think that's a huge consideration. Partnerships are a very, very big consideration because these are small to medium-sized projects. Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda. So I definitely agree that, because this was also something that we found in the ARA, that the projects that leverage these existing processes, existing projects, and that builds on that momentum, tended to have, greater signs of sustainability and potentially stronger outcomes. So this is kind of, it's a logical process, right? However, I would kind of push back perhaps to you and anyone else. Just this to me then becomes a question of where do we, how far do we go with our ambition? So the easy way is to focus the calls on existing projects or, something that builds on those processes. The harder way, and also understanding that there's a limitation in terms of time and resources. So it's essentially, taking into consideration that the outcome of this may be a little bit less than what one would have expected. But you can also kind of focus on building those new networks and relationships and starting a process kind of a little bit more emergent rather than something that has already been kind of developed over years, and allow that to build capacity amongst new actors and through a new process and hopefully to new outcomes. And I guess in my mind, this becomes an ambition question. So to me, I guess it would look like a hybrid of both, but I'd be interested to see if anyone else has any opinions on that.
I don't think you start from scratch in totality, Julio, but I think, like you say, it's a hybrid of both, because you can still build on an existing program with new actors, for example, with new partnerships, So it doesn't need to be, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. If something is not broken, then you don't need to start from scratch. It can still be a new initiative, but you can then relook at the partnerships and the institutions you're going to work with, who else might be doing, someone mentioned, that we don't need to repeat, duplicate efforts, right? So yeah, I think it's about, you can still, start a new program, but make sure that other voices, lesser represented, lesser heard voices are brought into that discussion.
I definitely agree. Making sure we're not just staying with the usual suspects within these projects and programs is quite important. Shuchi, please come in.
Sorry, it's becoming a bit of a program managers gathering here between the three of us. But I mean, to think of it, if we think of it if we think of these grants as grants that are actually pushing boundaries of existing knowledge, then none of those are from scratch, right? And there's always some existing work, whether it's in our purview or not. That's a separate issue altogether. But there's always some existing body of work or some existing body of practice that needs to be elevated, amplified, thought about differently, needs to probably go through a process of digestion, whatever that may be. But there's always that element of some body of practice that exists. So there's never I would actually sort of point out that there's never an entirely new project. It could be a new person starting to work on it and therefore becoming a new project, but it's never in totality a new project altogether. So in that respect, you'd always want evidence and you'd always want that backing from existing body of work around something. So
Completely agree. And I'm aware now that my use of from scratch was a terrible choice there. Not what I meant. Okay, so just accepting that there's been quite a lot of conversation amongst us three, is there anyone else who wasn't a presenter or supposed to be one of the facilitators, being us three, that would like to come in on any points that we've discussed? Besides Amanda? We can come back to you if there's no hands up. Any of the participants' reflections on any of the presentations that we've had today, please also feel free to raise your hand. All right, while people are thinking about that, Amanda, please come in.
I've got a question to Renzo. Is it still around? And my question is around the point you mentioned on demonstration projects. I think it was, such an interesting point that you raised, and I'd just like to hear more about, how you see that, playing out in real term. But specifically, the point you mentioned that, you'd like to see more funding being channeled down to local organizations, to run with those projects. So maybe can you just maybe unpack that for me a bit more?
Sure. Great question. Well, in terms of what the health sector can do to adapt and mitigate climate change, there is a wide range of actions that have already been identified. And the health sector, for instance, in the Philippines, is, the members of the health sector are quite excited. They're looking forward to really turn them into reality. But then I think it's important to make sure that there are, and I use the term demonstration projects, right? I'm trying to avoid the word pilot because pilotitis, which is a disease, is creeping, right, everywhere, right? Like and there are a lot of pilots that they don't end up becoming, institutionalized or scaled up. But demonstration projects will give other stakeholders, other health professionals, for instance, a concrete, demonstration of how change can actually be done. So, for example, when it comes to health sector mitigation to climate change, there's this growing recognition that healthcare is also emitting its own carbon, and therefore we need to begin lowering the carbon footprint of healthcare. Conceptually, people do understand it, but in practice, they're struggling. People are struggling to, how do we actually do that, right? How do we lower the carbon footprint of our hospitals so that we do no harm, not just to our patients, but to the planet? So if we can actually have demonstration projects, hospitals that others can emulate, I think that will be great. Same thing with adaptation, this idea of a climate resilient health system, health systems that bend but do not break. whether in the context of a pandemic or in the context of the climate crisis. Conceptually, people have an idea of what needs to be done, but they are still yet to see a real climate resilient health system at work. And it's easier to actually replicate that if people actually see how it's done. And what I'm learning from the other presenters and all the other recipients of the grants, because part of the process is attending all these workshops that we organized. We're learning a lot from how other sectors are doing it. For example, I think there are a lot of demonstration projects already in the area of agriculture. But in the health sector, the examples are very, very few, not just in the Philippines, but in the world. And so if we can actually put more resources to creating those living examples, then hopefully we will be able to inspire more health professionals and health systems to do the same. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Renzo. Yeah, I mean, this to me, this is a vital point here. I mean, a lot of the kind of bringing to light some of this peer-to-peer learning and showing success within perhaps less known spaces is pretty important. I mean, I've seen an example of this within the agriculture space where a project was working with a farmer to do intercropping with banana and coffee. And once the neighboring farms saw the success of what was happening there, they started replicating things within their own farms. Obviously, they didn't really understand the mechanics of what was happening, but you get this trickle of kind of interest and impact amongst people as soon as we're communicating these kind of benefits a little bit widely. So definitely take that point on the learning element. Great. So if there are no other hands, I think we can probably wrap up as well. So I'll give one last chance to anyone who wants to come in and engage with anything that we've discussed or ask anything of the presenters. And if not, then I would like to ask Jessie DeMaria-Kenny to provide us with a little bit of a wrap up. And I see we have a hand up first, so we will go into that. But yes, Sumaya, please come in.
Oh, hi. Yeah. So I am just I was actually in my travels, so I just came later for that. There was some noise beside me. So I was just wanted to tell that, yes, we need the small grants and funding for the local level people as they are the frontliners in many cases if we focus on the global south and especially in the South Asian region. So we have to focus on that, but we have to first at least capacitate them with the knowledge and the experience that the other groups who are actually working and worked in this regard. So I want to just focus on that we have to have the capacitate them first to implement their project or their grant in proper way. So that was my just opinion. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Completely agree. I think we need to start, especially with less common actors within the space, we need to start looking at capacity development efforts, kind of perhaps inherently built into this process as well. Great. So with that, I'll hand over to Jessie, and Jessie is the head of the Adaptation Research Alliance Secretariat. And please, over to you for the wrap up.
Great. Thank you very much, Julia. And thanks to Rosalind and all the speakers, and of course to everyone else here for this great conversation at the end. It's kind of nice. We don't have large numbers to go into breakout groups, so it was really great to get to hear what everybody had to say here. I think for me, maybe I just first want to say that really it's great to see that the pieces are moving into place, it seems, and activities are going ahead. We heard the examples of the CDKN Action Lab, their projects that came out of that. the Research Knowledge Coalition grants, and those, of course, the ARA micro grants, which I already knew about. But also just maybe to mention that on Monday, the ARA member Foundation Avena and their BASE initiative, which is building approaches to fund local solutions with climate evidence, will be hosting a final workshop on a consultative process on understanding the challenge of climate evidence for local finance, which is very related to this conversation that we're having today. So again, there's lots of these conversations going on, so it's great to kind of connect the dots here. So I guess to reflect on the speakers first is just a few top line reflections here. But from what Renzo said, he really highlighted the challenges and the successes of the project within the context of health, of course. And health and climate, as he said, came on the scene in COP26, and it seems like it's here to stay, which is good news for everybody who's concerned about their health or other people's health. And he also noted that every sector is a health sector, and I would agree with this statement. I'd also add the same can be applied to climate change. We need to adapt human systems and society to the negative impacts of climate change, and of course those that we're feeling today, but also those that will be bigger and more severe in the future. And this goes from health systems to smallholder agriculture production and supply chains, but also from markets, education systems. And while we do need to consider, let's say, the infrastructure aspects of these systems are built on, we also need to be looking at the social and the human aspects. But of course, I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here. From Janet, what I really noted here was that the project started small with the stakeholder engagement and ended up with diverse activities from the financial services and market linkages to advisory. But also that it really worked from farm and village level up to policy levels. So to me, that diversity across activity types from this x-axis, as well as across the levels from local up to national, if you will, on our y-axis, was really interesting. So again, I think that diversity and that multi-stakeholder aspect really stood out to me. And for Zakia, I think it was really just highlighting the collective activities there that were community driven and that really were a great example of how Southern leadership and how communities can ultimately turn a relatively small investment or a small amount of funding into significant results and impacts. So those are kind of my first three reflections from the speakers. And then just from what I've heard in this last conversation, a few points that just to throw out there really, and hopefully this conversation will continue in different places. But process is key, and flexibility in the process is important. We need to be moving away from these more target-driven or indicator-type activities that don't allow for emergent areas or activities to surface. Partnerships came out, and of course, not starting from scratch, as Julio said, but actually really building on existing partnerships and projects and investing in these partnerships and networks, so strengthening the ones that are already out there. From the speakers, I think also the presentations on the projects, technology came out with something that was throughout. We heard a lot about the digital technologies and some learning portal, but also it came out really that ensuring that there's access to appropriate technologies for farming and charcoal production, for example, from the example from Zakia. And the importance of learning, learning while doing emerged, I think, from all the projects, and it came out various times in the conversation that we had here. So kind of the actions on the ground were very clear, but everybody recognized the importance to learn and share these experiences. And this, I think, importantly came out, this was just not learning from south to south, but it can also be from south to north. So I think when we consider peer-to-peer learning, we just need to be more open and inclusive when we think of what is peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer is not only south-south, it can also be south-north. And of course, it can be north-south as well, but that's the more conventional take on it. And I guess maybe just to wrap up, one of the biggest takeaways, which I don't think is much of a surprise here, is really just the value of small-scale funding. So maybe it's better said, really not to undervalue what a little bit of funding can do. And I think often funders and also institutional institutions and organizations who are fundraising, they envision large-scale funding as a way to achieve impact. In fact, during the launch of the ARA microgrants, we received feedback from some of the larger institutions saying that the amount of the grants were too small and really not worth their time and their investment that would be required for that type of large institution. Well received, the point of the microgrants, but I think what we've seen today is that small scale funding might not work for some institutions or organizations, but it definitely will work for others, particularly those kind of closer to the ground and those working in the communities. And just last on that is that the small scale funding can be an important stepping stone for larger programs and projects, but also let's not forget that small scale funding can make significant impacts and should be valued in its own right. And then the last point I think that came out was really great was about really, again, this is about those on the front line who need to lead this change, and we need to really strengthen the capacities there to help provide that type of change and leadership that we're looking for. And that's really, I guess, the end of my reflections from what I've heard from the speakers and the conversation. So just thank you all very much. It's been really great. I've just been sitting back here in the shadows listening. But yeah, it's been quite interesting, and thank you very much. So over to you, Rosalind.
Thanks so much, Jesse. I mean, you've really given a fantastic summary there of the conversation that we've had today. And, you know, I really just wanted to build on that and say thank you. And, you know, it's really clear to me that the way that we design grants, you know, if I sort of sit here with my hat on of sitting in a major grant making organization, it's really clear that the design of these grants can really have a major impact on empowering Southern practitioners, on strengthening capacity, on building on previous experience and relationships, you know, on catalyzing future investment and vastly increase impact, not just at the local level, which is really important, but also on international practice. And then we've also seen that international collaboration, the North-South, the South-South, South-North, such a rich opportunity for multi-directional peer learning. And, you know, I think this conversation has been really valuable. You know, under some of these initiatives, we're planning further rounds of grants, and those will be influenced by what we've collectively learned from today's sessions and what the evaluation of what happens under these types of grants. So thank you all so much for your time today. You know, thank you to our speakers, Renzo Guinto, Janet Ngumbalu, Zakia Sultana, to Giulio Arujo for leading the breakout session, and to Jesse for those concluding remarks. Thank you to the host organisations, the Adaptation Research Alliance, the CDKN, the Global Resilience Partnership, the International Centre for Climate Change and Development. You know, and thank you so much to you, the audience. And now, just finally, I really wanted to hand over to the Paris Committee on Capacity Building Network, who I think want to have the very final words. So thanks all so much for your enthusiasm and expertise today and for sharing that.
Thank you so much, Rosalind, for the excellent moderator, and for all the panelists, participants, and of course the ARA for taking a lead role and leading this and organizing this webinar, but then for the co-organizers as well, and the panelists and speakers especially for really sort of sharing their knowledge and reflecting on these different programs and the values of Southern leadership, you know, community-driven approaches that was mentioned in the discussions, peer-to-peer learning, but then especially really the need of capacity building at the institutional and systemic level, and really sort of ensuring that these, you know, grant making processes really empower Southern practitioners and reach those that need it and deliver these different actions and programs at the local level. But yeah, I'd just like to quickly bring your attention to the PCCB network and our team. We actually provided a support in sort of facilitating this webinar. And just to tell you a little bit about the PCCB network, it was actually established by the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, which is a constituted body under the UNFCCC, and it essentially seeks to enhance coherence and coordination efforts of capacity building in developing countries to deliver ambitious climate action. So the network was set up a couple of years ago, and it brings together, it's a voluntary association of different stakeholders engaged in climate change related capacity building, and the goal is really to bring together all these different actors in events such as this one, and you know, through these different partnerships, and really sort of fostering the exchange of lessons learned, capacity gaps and needs, best practices of their work, you know, challenges, and really sort of connect peers across countries and across institutions. So again, this is a bit of an example of how members of the network like the ARA and CDKN come together to deliver these events in ICCCAD. But yeah, we currently have around 307 members of the network, and of course, we welcome many more. My colleague Courtney will actually be sharing the links with more information. Yeah, she's already shared them on the chat. So if you'd like to learn a bit more about the network and become a member, please feel free to join. And yes, and another way through which the PCCB mobilizes members of the network and their expertise is actually through the Capacity Building Hub. And the Capacity Building Hub, the fourth Capacity Building Hub, will actually be taking place at COP27 this year. And again, the hub will actually take place for 7 days. Each day will sort of cover a different thematic track. We'll look at topics from a just transition, action for climate empowerment, capacity building for networks. But of course, yes, always with the link of capacity building. So we very much welcome you all to learn more about the hub and join virtually or in person and yeah, really supporting and sort of having these different events around capacity building and connecting different actors that are interested in capacity building and sort of foster this co-creation and co-shaping of learning. So more information on that on the chat. And then if you'd like to stay up to date with the latest updates and capacity building work of the PCCB, the network, and the ICCCAD, make sure you do join the UN Climate Change Capacity Building LinkedIn group, and to also do networking and connect with different actors working on capacity building. And then lastly, I would just like to remind everyone that we'll be sharing a recording of the event and a summary report of the event in due course. So yeah, really stay tuned for that and just make sure that you really get the latest updates or emails or LinkedIn. And we'll also be sharing as well a link for you to fill out the post-event survey, which my colleague Courtney has already shared, but grateful if you could give us your feedback to see how we can improve future events and stay connected. With that, yeah, thank you again, Rosalind, the co-organizers, and yeah, I think this wraps up the session. And thank you everyone again, and hope you have a great rest of your day.